In this video, we're going to be replacing wheel bearings on this trailer.
Take this guy off.
This was my first time doing a project like this, so if I can do it, you should be able to do it too. The first step after removing that tire is to remove the spindle nut. Now, typically it's held on by a cotter pin like you see here. I had a slightly different setup. Instead of the cotter pin, I had something called a spindle tang, and that's what holds that spindle nut in place. Okay, now that we have that spindle nut off, the next thing is the spindle tang, and then we have a washer, and then the next thing is the bearing. And then now we're also going to slide that hub off. Now, that's the spindle we're looking at. We're going to clean that up with some paper towel, and we're going to take this whole assembly to the workbench.
Pry that out of there. It's really stuck. So I got this wood. It's keeping it off the ground, so I can just kind of, from the back, beat it out of there. So it worked on the last one. Let's see.
I want to note that we're going to be replacing the wheel bearings, the races, and what we're trying to remove here is the grease seal. Normally you can pry this out of here, but this has been there so long I have to beat it out.
And a bearing. But the race is still in there. We got to get that out next. So we got to get that race out. If you can see that, there's a race in there. And there's that one there. We got to get those out. First, we're going to clean this up a little. Last time this one worked pretty good.
I'm using a socket extension to act as a punch to beat this race out. A punch would work even better.
Hey, got it. Now we're going to get this one out. And again, I don't know what you can see on the camera there, but I'm just trying to get that little lip. There's a little lip that even something like this can get on. So a punch, I think a punch would do a real nice job. All right, let's clean you up.
All right, it's time to order some brand new parts. So how do you do that? If you look, it's hard to see in the video, but there are numbers that are stamped on the bearings. Each bearing has a specific number. You can take these numbers and you can go to the internet, either Amazon. I went to etrailer.com. Then 5 days later, I had a package in the mail. Let's check it out.
Open it up here. Safety first. I have a cap. Looks like an outer race, probably the outer bearing. I have the inner bearing and the inner race. And then a lock pin or this guy.
All right, so it's time to put things back together. We're going to start with the outer race and the outer bearing. To make our lives a little bit easier, we're going to put a little bit of grease in the hub, and that's going to help kind of reduce the friction to put that race in there a little bit easier.
We just so happen to have a socket that fits perfectly on top. We're not so lucky with that other side, but we're just pounding it in there. And then, you know, so this needs to be smaller, of course, than this diameter, and that socket works perfect. And I think we're there. So again, that bearing will go into there. All right, let's put this big one in. This big one's a little trickier because this guy doesn't want to fit. This guy's too big. But what I did on the last one is I just used that big race to help. So the big part of that race is going to go on top. Then we'll be able to whack that down. with this. All right, I'll help you in a minute. Daddy's all greasy. Okay. Getting a little kitty wampus on me, so I'm gonna gently tap on the sides here, get us back on track. Or not. So that guy is seated in there. So now we can jam those bearings full of grease. We'll do the big guy first. Get a bunch of grease in our palm. I'm just gonna jam this full of grease.
So this is a messy endeavor. Gloves are almost a must. We're gonna pack that bearing as full of grease as we possibly can. Then we're gonna set it inside the race, and that's where it's gonna live. We're gonna put some more grease in there. Really, you can't use too much grease. Next, we're gonna install this grease seal. This is gonna hold that race and that bearing in place, and we're gonna tap the seal in place with a block of wood. We're just gonna give it some taps. We're gonna make sure that it doesn't get unlevel. We're just gonna lightly tap, tap, tap root till it's set.
Let's jam this guy full of grease here.
We're gonna do the same process to the other side. We're gonna fill that bearing full of grease. We're gonna set it inside of that race, and then we're gonna jam pack everything full of grease. Now this side is gonna be held on by the spindle nut. All right, it's time to put everything back together. We're gonna slide this whole hub assembly back onto the spindle. We're gonna replace the washer. Then we're gonna put the spindle tang on. Now remember, this is the setup I have. This is what's gonna hold the spindle nut on. You may have a cotter pin. Now we're gonna use the spindle nut, and we're gonna just hand tighten everything on there until we get this wheel on. Okay, my lug nuts are on, they're tightened. I'm gonna tighten the spindle nut more than it needs to be. That's something that was kind of unclear in some of the past videos. I'm gonna tighten it more than it needs to be because that's gonna kind of squish everything together. Then I'm gonna slightly back off. I want it to be just tight enough where it spins freely, but there's no wiggle in the tire. So you might have to experiment with a few different positions, and then once you have the proper position, then I have to take one of the tabs of the spindle tang and I bend it down to secure that spindle nut in place so it won't back up. And I apologize, my big head was in the way of this, but with needle nose pliers, I just bent down that little tab, and now that nut won't go backwards, it won't back out. I'll do it in slow motion here for you in case you missed it. So now we're good. The nut's secured. All right, now finally, to protect our new bearings and protect the grease and keep out any kind of dirt and grime and water out of there, we're gonna set a new hubcap on. Hopefully this video was informative. If you got any questions, hit me up in the comment section. Thanks for watching.